Hello and welcome to Praying on Purpose. I will once again begin by taking this opportunity to remind everyone that our learning here is dedicated for Refuah Shalema for Ilana Chana Basgila Brainla. We pray that she have a Refuah Shalema, a speedy recovery, Besoch Sha'ar Chola Yisrael. So on Sundays, we reflect upon the question of why do we daven? And another way of asking that question is, where did it all start? At which point in history was prayer introduced for the very first time? That may give us some insight as to why we are doing it in the first place. So several weeks ago, we mentioned that the concept of prayer, or maybe more precisely, the need for prayer, was embedded into the creation of the world itself. And so therefore, we can literally say that prayer can be dated back to the first moments in time. But yet there's no question that Chazal saw prayer in all of its complexity, something which was sort of rolled out in stages and phases over the course of history. An important part of that process occurs during the lifetime of the Avos, specifically Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And I'm going to reflect on this now for several weeks because the timing is just too perfect to ignore. This week we are going to be reading Parshas Vayera, next week Chayisara, and a couple weeks afterwards Parshas Vayetze. And Chazal tell us in the Gemara Brachos, Daf Chavav and Beis, that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov introduced or instituted Shachris, Mincha, and Mariv. And they see this from Psukim that we are going to read in those Parshios. So the Pasuk, which is the Gemara rather, which is found in Brachos, Daf Chavav and Beis, tells us that, at least according to one opinion, Tfilos, Avos Tiknum, that the Tfilos, Shachris, Mincha, Mariv, were instituted by the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And where do we see that? So the Gemara tells us, well, Avraham Avinu instituted Shacharis, because as we are going to read in this coming week's parasha, Vayashkem Avram Baboker, Avram got up early in the morning. He attended what we would call today Hashkama Minyan. Elamakam, when he returned to the place, Asher Omad Sham Es Pnei Hashem, the place where he previously stood. And Chazal tell us, Ein Amida Ela Tefillah. When it says that Avram stood, what that really means is he stood in prayer, because Ein Amida Ela Tefillah. This is the first iteration, if you will, of prayer as instituted by the Avos, according to Chazal. What about the Tefillah of Mincha? So Chazal continue and tell us that we're going to read in next week's Parsha, in Parshas Chayisara, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnos orev. That Yitzchak went out, lasuach basadeh, to converse in the field. Lifnos erev, towards the evening. And Chazal tell us, ein sicha ela tefillah. When it says sicha, that he was participating in what we would call a conversation, that is a reference to prayer. And finally, we are going to read in the beginning of Parshas Vayetze, Yaakov in Beersheva, Vayelech Haran, Yaakov goes out, and he travels towards Haran, Vayivga b'makom, Vayolon Sham kiva hashemesh. It was towards the end of the day, and he encountered that place, Vayivka b'makom, and that's right, you see it coming, Chazal say, Ein pigia ela tefillah. So Chazal are telling us that, listen, prayer exists in many different forms. There's a type of prayer that is called Hamida, there's a type of prayer that's called Sicha, there's a type of prayer that's called Pigia. Now, what exactly does this mean? That the Avos instituted tefillah? Does this mean that the tefillah shachris that we say today is exactly the way Avraham Avinu said it? And Yitzchak was the one who composed tefillah mincha the way we see it? And the answer, says the Rambam, is no. The Rambam says not what it means. When it says tefillos avos tiknum, this doesn't mean that the exact construct of the prayer, that the format of the prayer is exactly the way it was back then. But what it does mean on a certain level is that they serve to inspire the concept of prayer, and specifically davening 3 times during the day. We are not going to focus on this morning because there's only so much time that we have in any given session. But what I would like to come back to, please God, in the not so distant future, is to talk about the concept of prayer in morning, afternoon, and evening. How those 3 times of the day represent different times of the day, but allow us to come to a conversation with God from a different perspective. And we will also, Bezos Hashem, be able to see how Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the way they lived their lives, were such that sort of leveraged from their own personal experience the capacity to really, really, really connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through these 3 channels of Shachris, Mincha, Mariv. But what I would like to share with you this morning is a very, very fascinating insight, which I have found from the writings of Rabbi Yisachar Dov Mibelz, the Belzer Rebbe. And he says something which is very, very interesting. He focuses not so much on the concept of Shachus Mincha Mariv, meaning morning, afternoon, evening, but he talks about the fact that Chazal are focusing over here on three different expressions of prayer: Amida, Sicha, and Pegia. He says Avraham Avinu was the one who sort of introduced to the world that prayer is a formal exercise. It's one that needs to be done at a certain time and in a certain place. So, for example, we had already mentioned that Avraham Avinu was the one who taught us the concept of Makom Kavua. We learned that from Avraham Avinu, from this very pasuk, because he returned to the place Asher Omad Sham. The concept of Amida, if you think about standing at attention, means that I'm sort of present, I am prepared, and I am engaging in a formal exercise. And so therefore, Avram teaches us, you know what prayer is? Prayer is a highly structured, regulated activity in which I come to stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and follow a certain form, if you will. I'm going to work with a certain script, and I am basically going to engage in a process which is highly structured, very regulated. That's the concept introduced by Avraham Avinu. But continues the Belzer Rebbe, and he says, you know, Yitzchak Avinu recognizes that not everybody is cut out for that, that there may be certain individuals, or I'll say maybe certain times in life, in which that highly structured and regulated mode of prayer is not necessarily going to work for me, that I need to approach HaKadosh Baruch Hu from a place of, let's just say, a little less formality. It's true that I have a script in front of me. It's true that I have a sitter. And it's true that everything that I need to say has been prepared for me. But honestly, right now, I'm at a place where I need to speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu from my heart. I need to just converse with him the way I would talk to a friend, the way I would talk to a close confidant. And so therefore, Yitzchak Avinu introduces this idea, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. Chazal tell us, Ein sicha ela tefillah. Tefillah doesn't only have to be amida, meaning tefillah, prayer, doesn't only have to be in the most formal, structured, scripted manner, but it could also be in the form of sicha, which means just talking in a way that seems a little more personal, a little more genuine, a little more real. I'm speaking to you from where I am right now, my own personal experience. This is not necessarily where I was yesterday. This is not a makom kavua. I'm not standing in the sense that I am following a script that has been prepared for me, but I am just speaking from the depth of my heart. That type of prayer is also, Yitzchak Avinu teaches, is also a prayer. And what does Yaakov introduce? He introduces the concept of pegia. Vayifga b'makom ein pegia ela lashon tefillah. And in this regard, says the Belzer Rebbe, you know what this means? It means that there's a prayer of Amida, in which, as we said, is structured in terms of the time and the format and where I'm standing. There's Sicha, which allows for a little more personal flexibility. I could customize it, so to speak, for my needs in the moment. And then there's a tefillah of Pegia. Pegia means a chance encounter. It's something that was not on my schedule. It's something that was not planned. I didn't say to myself, oh, I have another hour, and then I have to daven Mariv. It's something which comes sort of spontaneously. I find myself in a situation, either a perilous situation or perhaps a very wonderful, a very positive situation. And from deep within, there is a need at that moment. There is a desire to speak to the Ribono Shalom, to connect to the Ribono Shalom. And that as well is prayer. So therefore, explains the Belzer Rebbe that what Chazal teach us, that Tfilos Avos Tiknum, that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov instituted three prayers, Shachus Mincha Mariv. There may be a lot more to discuss over here. In fact, there is. This is not intended to be a full discussion about this issue. But what Chazal is teaching us over here is that not every prayer and not every type of prayer is the same. And Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov being the founding fathers, the trailblazers, if you will, who sort of prepared the way for us and carved out a map which enables us to turn to God 3 times a day, Shachris, Mincha, Mariv. They introduced the concept of 3 modes of prayer. Ein tefillah ela amida, or rather, ein amida ela tefillah, that standing before God in that formal sense, that's prayer. Ein sicha ela tefillah, conversing in a more casual, unscripted way, that's also prayer. And finally, ein pegia ela tefillah, encountering in these chance, spontaneous moments in life when we have an opportunity to just talk to God and just stop whatever we're doing and just to connect with him. I'm not putting my feet together. I'm not finding myself in a makam kavua. And in this case, I'm not even reflecting so much from where I am at the moment. I'm just speaking in a very, very casual way. These are all three modes of prayer. And we have to know that they exist, because there are going to be times in our life in which we're going to need to rely on the structure, on the predictability, on the formality of a midah. There are going to be times that we're going to allow ourselves, and we're going to need to permit ourselves to engage in something which is a little more casual, customizable, if you will, through sicha. And then there are going to be times, and we need to listen deep inside to ourselves when we need those moments of pigia, those chance, spontaneous encounters. This is what it means when Chazal tell us that tefillos avos tiknum. And so therefore, as we continue to explore together, why do we pray? We have to recognize and appreciate that prayer in all of its forms has been rolled out over the course of Jewish history, but through the avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, major paradigms of prayer were introduced to us many, many centuries ago and continue to inspire us to this very day. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.